I'm Christie Bilbrey. After working in a Senate press office, the White House, and corporate, I decided to start my own business and quickly realized that one thing I never learned in those was how to market myself. Thankfully, I discovered brand storytelling and combined that with PR and marketing strategy made it so much easier for me to connect with others, promote my services, and grow my brand. I created the Business That Story Built podcast to help business leaders learn how to do the same. Ready? Let's get started. Welcome back. We are in the personal brand series, and I am very excited for a place that is so great to grow your personal brand. Today, we're diving into social media, and let me tell you a little bit about today's guest. We have Ashley Mason, who's the founder of Dash of Social, a content marketing agency specializing in social media management, blog content, and email marketing. Ashley and her team help small businesses and tech startups craft and execute value-driven marketing strategies designed to establish thought leadership, grow online communities, and drive brand awareness. Additionally, Ashley founded Massachusetts Business Network in 2022, which is the only statewide publication that provides free to low-cost resources that support organizations with increasing their visibility and establishing thought leadership through its podcast, blog, and directory. She's a TEDx speaker, has been named a 40 under 40 honoree by Cape and Plymouth Business Media, and was recognized as Best Social Media Specialist by Boston Businesswomen. When she isn't working, you can find her running on her Peloton or curled up on the couch with a book. Thank you so much for joining today, Ashley.
Thank you for having me here, Christy. I'm super excited.
Yes, this is an area that I think people are excited about, but they can also be intimidated about. And so there are so many great influencers who it just feels effortless in the way that they grow their personal brand on social media. But it doesn't mean the rest of us are left out. There are a lot of things that can be learned and tips and lots of things that are changing. So I'm excited to dive in. But first, why don't you just share a little bit about your background and kind of what brought you to where you are today?
Of course. As you mentioned, my company is Dash of Social. Dash of Social. I'm a content marketing agency based in Massachusetts. We specialize in social media management, blog content, and email marketing. We've been around since 2016, so as of the time of this recording, almost 8 years old. What I actually got into with being able to start my agency was a long time ago, which actually feels like it was only a few years ago, but it was back in 2012. So that was about 12 years ago. I started a blog, and long story short, wanted to find a way to monetize that blog and reach my ideal audience, which at the time was high school and college age girls, because I realized I was spending all of this time diving into the blog and creating new content just for my family to read it. So I said to myself, how can I increase my website traffic and reach the right people? And that was through social media. So through some trial and error and teaching myself how to use social media, probably around 2013 was the year from a business standpoint. I ended up getting really cool freelance opportunities, which just kind of naturally led me into working with companies to support them with their social media until I had my aha moment that I wanted to start a marketing agency. And that's really when Dash of Social came about. And now here I am almost 8 years later.
Yeah, congratulations. That's a cool story. And I like that you say things weren't working and it was social that helped you kind of figure out how to really connect and engage with your audience. For business leaders, thought leaders, what would you say is the best place for them to start thinking about how to go about building a personal brand with social media?
Yes, I would say it really starts with thinking about your content pillars and your goals. So before you can even think about what platforms or channels you want to be using, you have to think about A, what do I want to be known for? And B, what goals do I want to reach using social media? Once you understand your content pillars or ultimately the content categories that really help to set you aside as an expert, and also how you would like to achieve certain goals through social media, then you can really start to go into the nuances of figuring out which social media platforms will help you to reach those goals and best portray or flex those content pillars and really develop a solid strategy from there.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think looking at your audience and kind of trying to see where they are. Um, there's so many options today from LinkedIn to TikTok to Instagram, Facebook. There's a lot to choose from. And I think some, especially if you're not in the super young age, that it can feel a little bit more intimidating to dive into. So how do you recommend people acclimate themselves to maybe get more comfortable in a platform that they don't necessarily have a lot of experience on?
That's a great question. So I would say it really starts off by only maybe starting with one to two platforms to begin with, instead of trying to use all of them at once. That's going to lead to social media burnout, and you're going to end up completely ditching your efforts. So it really comes down to firstly figuring out where your target audience is hanging out. Social media schedulers like Hootsuite and I believe Buffer also puts this out, but they create really awesome reports each year that actually breaks down the demographic of each social media platform. So you'll be able to see genders, ages, education, all of these really helpful information about what types of individuals are using the platform. And then you can kind of take that information and closely align it with who your ideal client or customer is and know where to start. So once you know which social media channels you should focus on, again, really only beginning with one or two so you're not overwhelming yourself, you can then start to slowly create content. Similar to what I mentioned earlier about how people assume they need to be on all platforms immediately, they also assume that they need to be creating and posting content all day, every day. And that definitely is not the case. I'm a big advocate of establishing consistency rather than frequency. So starting off with even just one post per week, as long as you're consistently showing up and publishing that one post per week, that is so much better than trying to do too many things at once, because you're going to be able to easily stick with it. And then your audience is going to get used to the fact that you're posting that same day every week, and they'll start to look out for your content. Once you feel like you're in that good groove and that you can absolutely manage the low commitment that you have of content you're creating, then you can kind of start to up the stakes as you feel more comfortable and feel like you have more content to share until you have a really robust plan that you've now executed.
And what do you think people often miss about social media that you wish they would take advantage of? Like what's possible?
Oh my gosh. So I would say I feel like things have changed now, but when I first started Dash of Social, there was a huge notion that you had to strictly keep business as business and personal life as personal life. But as we've all seen throughout the past few years, especially, there's so much more what I like to call humanized content that comes across platforms. So it's people sharing how they spend their time outside of work, how they've overcome burnout within their career, exciting achievements that they've had throughout their life. They're starting to get more personal with that, and it's really that personalized content that helps to establish that know, like, and trust factor with your audience and really helps someone to feel like they resonate with you and build that relationship. And once you've kind of built that rapport with a person, that's what makes them want to do business with you. So there is a bit of hesitancy still, I would say, with some leaders and some individuals with feeling uncomfortable or feeling like it may be appropriate to share too much personal information, but it's really that raw, authentic, genuine content that really builds those connections, and it's those connections that drive business.
Right. Yeah, I love that. And since you're kind of talking about mixing the business and the personal, you touched on content pillars earlier, but maybe going into a little bit more detail about how do you come up with the right content pillars, especially if we're talking about personal brands. So maybe it's a CEO or a founder and they have their company posts, but they want to, share more about who they are and what they think. But what are ideas to even kind of get them started about what content pillars might look like for them?
Absolutely. It really comes down to thinking about what you want to be known for and what you feel like you ultimately want to show off. So, content pillars can be broad too. They don't have to be super specific. They kind of if you would like them to be, but you can also keep them open-ended. So, typically, when a founder or someone within a company is starting to just focus on their social media, I encourage them to be a little bit more open-ended. So, that might think about or lead to them being able to create content pillars such as testimonials or case studies to show the success of their work, or it might show press features to show where they've been featured. It also might demonstrate blog posts if they're constantly producing blog posts for their company, being able to ensure that they're showing that. Really being able to think about all of these different buckets ultimately or categories of types of content you're able to produce and share will ensure that you're able to create this well-oiled machine that's constantly producing great content and engaging with your audience.
Well, and so you also talked about a little bit ago kind of how to avoid burnout. So if people feel like, they go on vacation or they get sick or something and they had been consistent and they have a drop off, how do they come back and deal with potential burnout? Like I've told everybody all I have to say, what's left? How do you help people just kind of the mindset piece that we know social media has its positives, it has its negatives. So just kind of walking through that and keeping yourself in the happy place. That, what do you recommend?
Yes, definitely. So I always say that if a piece of content that you produce can help at least one person, it's worth it and it's done its job. So just remembering as you're writing content or thinking about what you'd like to create, keep that person in the back of your mind who might be reading that post or who might be listening to that podcast or who might be watching that video and say, is this content going to help someone or benefit someone or improve their life in some way? If the answer is yes, then I think that's your motivation to keep moving forward and keep creating content. I also will say that the best content comes when you feel inspired and motivated. So
Mhm.
if you're truly not feeling it, don't sit there and force yourself to try to write content or try to produce it, because more often than not, you're probably not going to produce the greatest work. And it happens to all of us when we're just not feeling something and we're not inspired and we're not in the zone, we don't have the best outcomes. When you do end up having those moments where you feel really inspired and creative and excited about what's to come, you want to take advantage of those. And that can be really helpful with just being able to flush out content that really resonates and aligns with your audience. Along with that, I'm a big fan of batching your work. So if your schedule allows, I highly recommend maybe setting 1 hour per day or 1 day per week or 1 day per month to really dedicate it to developing your content. You'll be able to get through so much in just that short amount of time. And then you'll be able to have that set it and forget it mentality almost, where you know it's done, it's scheduled, and then you know it's being posted and published for you. That will help you to prevent burnout as well because you'll be able to get ahead of the game rather than scrambling and trying to pick up the pieces when you're juggling a busy client load or anything else that comes with life, the busy seasons, and making sure that you're still producing content as well. So, as much as you can do in advance, you will definitely be better off in the long run.
What are some easy ways that people can up level their brand online? Like, let's talk specifically about LinkedIn. I think a lot of people listening to this are in the B2B space, they're on LinkedIn, and there are so many different pieces that you have available to, um, all the different features. So what matters most, and what are some kind of easy ways that they can quickly up level their presence there?
Absolutely. I would say first and foremost, you want to make sure that your profile is fully filled out and optimized. So, from the headline of what your position is, a lot of people get creative with that and might do like a cutesy tagline rather than actually listing their job position. That's something that people see right away. So, you want to capture someone's attention. I also say that filling in your about section or your bio very robustly, also ensuring that you're filling out all the positions that you've had or your career history really closely will do you much more in the long run. Because if someone goes to a LinkedIn profile and they see sparse information, they're not necessarily going to have that level of trust as they would for someone who's taken the time to really explain themselves and demonstrate their expertise and really outline all of the success that they've had in their career. I would say it starts there by ensuring that your profile is fully optimized and complete. But I also say that visuals are important too. So getting a professional headshot, whether it's a branding photo shoot or maybe even take it yourself with some great editing, but that is great because first impressions matter. And that's one of the first things people will see when they see your LinkedIn profile is that headline and your profile photo. So you want to make sure that you're capturing people right off the bat.
And that about section, LinkedIn gives you a lot of real estate for that. What are the best ways to put it to work for you?
I like to use it as giving a background of who you are and what you've done in your career. I think it's also great to include places you've been featured. So if you've been included in prominent publications, definitely make sure to mention those. And then I think also including maybe your top 3 to 5 career highlights that you've been able to achieve. Those are the things that people are going to see right away. So you want to sit down and think to yourself, what about my career? What about my life is going to impress my ideal client or my ideal customer? And then think of the about section or the bio that you should craft that will actually strike a nerve with that person and encourage them to send a connection request to you or respond to the DM you might have sent them.
Is there any, specific structure or framework that you might recommend to help with that, or is it just going to differ for everybody based on personality?
I would say it differs based on personality, and I think everyone can agree with the fact that it's really hard to write about yourself. So sometimes it's easier if you kind of just start with being able to write about what you would like to make sure is included in your bio, and then perhaps share it with a colleague that you can trust who can go through and edit it and provide recommendations.
Yeah, I think that's getting an extra set of eyes on that is always helpful. And then the banner space. So there's so many different things. What are some tips to take advantage of that?
I personally, for a personal brand, love using the banner to showcase perhaps what it is within your company portfolio. So if you have one company, being able to include your logo and again, logos of any prominent publications you've been featured. I think it's also really cool when people create a graphic for that banner that shows like the statistics of what they've achieved so far in their career. Like people might say, purchased in 7 countries, have had 300 customers, like kind of giving very specific numbers, I think is a great way to stand
Hmm.
out and show that you have that credibility and expertise. And then I'd also say it's a great way to demonstrate if you're an individual who has a product company to actually showcase the products and show what it is that you do. So that way, when people go through and see that banner, it instantly stands out to them and it's something that causes them to do what I call is stop the scroll. So what's that thing that's going to make people stop and look at what it is rather than mindlessly scroll through?
Yeah, those are great. And when it comes to metrics, looking at the analytics, because sometimes it can feel disconcerting. You think, oh, I spent all this time on this content and, is anybody out there? Is anybody seeing it? So what are ways that people should and shouldn't think about metrics and which ones really matter most?
Absolutely. I'm a believer that likes are a vanity metric because I think we're all guilty of mindlessly scrolling through a social media platform and just double tapping on that reaction button without actually reading the post or understanding what the content is. So just because something got a big amount of likes doesn't necessarily mean it inspired action. And also the opposite, just because something didn't receive that many reactions or that many likes doesn't mean that the content flopped, quote unquote. So I would say it's always best to look at the actions that require deeper thought or deeper intentions behind that. So that might be how many comments did that post get? How many shares did that or reposts did that post get? Are you able to see website traffic from that post? If you're tracking the website link, if you've included a link to your website within that caption, how much traffic is coming from that post specifically to your website? You want to look into those deeper metrics to follow because if your content directly inspired someone to take a next step or follow some type of action, then that shows that your content has done its job. However, I will also say that there are many lurkers on social media, and myself personally, I've heard so many people who have said to me, "Oh, I saw your post about such and such." And I'm like, "Oh, but I know you didn't like that post or leave a comment on that post." But it goes to show that there's so many people who are seeing what you're doing and they're remembering it, but they just might not be interacting or engaging with your content in some way. So that's important to keep in mind as well, is that it's not just necessarily the public facing metrics or analytics you can see that really drives the success. You also have to think about the people who just might kind of be behind the scenes or behind the curtain, but are still remembering and seeing everything that you're doing.
I'm so glad you said that. I completely agree. Same thing. We're all here, people, and they're like, oh, yeah, I remember this post you did about whatever, or I've been following you. And I'm thinking, really? Because I have not. I didn't know you weren't interacting, or at least, we're thinking those things. But I think that does matter. And so you are growing your presence even when it doesn't feel like it. And I think that's kind of the perseverance. I've talked to influencers who say, you know what, this is my passion. I was posting about this for a year and I would get, very few likes or comments. And then it just kind of hits a point where it starts to take off. You keep kind of fine tuning and growing, and people who you didn't even think were paying attention are. So, how have you seen that in your work?
Yes, I would say it often happens when a lead comes through. So this happens to me, I'd say probably at least a dozen times throughout the past few years, where someone will reach out to me to book a consultation call and they'll say, "Oh, I've been following you on social media for 2 years, but I'm finally just now ready to reach out and talk about your services and what I'm looking for." And I think there are several other people who are in that same boat too, where they've had people who have kind of been following closely about what they're doing, but they're not necessarily reaching out to inquire about their services or their products until a time when they're ready. So that's the value and the importance of being consistent and showing up on that day-to-day basis for the people who are kind of keeping you top of mind and kind of keeping you in their back pockets. So that way, when they are ready to make that buying decision, you're the person that they've been thinking about all along.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So, what would you say isn't working anymore that maybe people it used to be they were so focused on, but don't waste your time. This is not going to serve you. Algorithms don't care about these features.
Yeah, I would say I have seen a little bit that when people heavily include links in captions, that can negatively impact the reach or the engagement of a post because LinkedIn wants to keep you on the platform. So people kind of get creative with including a link in the comments, or they might include a call to action at the bottom of the caption that says, "Send me a DM in order to learn more about this." So people are getting more creative with finding more ways for people to stay on the LinkedIn platform itself rather than divert off. I would say that. And I would also say posting generic content. So honing in on content that might be stock images or might be not so visually appealing graphics, really being able to show the people behind your organization and also yourself, I think is incredibly important because it's that humanized content that I mentioned earlier and showing the people behind the business that really drives that engagement and interaction.
What about hashtags? Do they still matter? And if so, what recommendations do you have?
I feel like it depends on the purpose for them. So hashtags are good, I find, for like industry events. Like if you're attending a conference, it's great to use a hashtag to try to find it, to try to find posts that other attendees or speakers might be using for the conference or event itself as well. But honestly, for hashtags on LinkedIn, if I use them, which I don't typically use them often, I would probably limit them to 2 to 3 per post because I feel like the user experience of looking through hashtag feeds on LinkedIn is very poor compared to Instagram. It's really easy and really user friendly to look at hashtag feeds on a platform like Instagram, but with something like LinkedIn, the content isn't always relevant. So it can be really hard to ensure that you're finding the content that you want to be engaging in and kind of ensuring that you're amongst like-minded people. So I wouldn't stress about it. But I would say that it is a great feature to use if you are speaking at or attending some type of industry event where other people might be using that hashtag to connect with one another as well.
Okay. So that for LinkedIn, but for Instagram, still important. I know it was initially everybody wanted to have 30 hashtags on Instagram, and that's kind of come down. So what's your recommendation on a platform like Instagram for that?
I would say that also depends as well. So you can be more specific. I would say that with the hashtags itself, it's better to be more specific with the hashtags that you're using rather than being open-ended. So when it comes to the topic that you're using the hashtags for, just making sure that you're very clear and providing clarity on what it is. But I also would say that thinking about the hashtags themselves in terms of the size is important too. So you don't necessarily want to post to a hashtag that might have tens of millions of posts within that. You want to find something that's a little bit more smaller so that your post doesn't get flooded in the feed or lost in translation from all of the other content that's constantly being posted using that hashtag as well. So I tend to find anywhere from hashtags that have like 500,000 posts to maybe 2 million posts tend to be that sweet spot. But it also really depends on your industry, because if you're something in an industry or in a field that's super niche or super specific, you might want to use those smaller hashtags to ensure that you're really connecting with the right people.
And to switch gears a little bit and just talk a little bit about TikTok. So, a lot of people, I think, in B2Bs often steer away from that. And then I talk to other people who say, you know what, dive in. People are really growing quickly. Don't be afraid of that. How do you see that fitting into personal brands for business leaders in B2B?
Yeah, and I think in that question there, Christy, is the term that you use is really what nailed it. You want to think about the leaders. You don't want to necessarily create a TikTok account for the organization, because I think that will fall flat with users. You want to think about who can be the spokesperson for our organization, or who can really be the face of the brand, and create a TikTok account that's really centered around that individual. Personally, I view TikTok as almost like a search engine. I mean, I use TikTok personally to search like how to curl my hair or easy dinner recipes. Like I almost use it like I use YouTube or Google. And so thinking about content you can create that would be something that's a searchable term like that, I think will bring you closer to actually reaching the people who would be looking for an account like yours or content like yours.
Yeah, and I spoke with someone who had told me, she said it's things you wouldn't even expect. Like she's a corporate executive and she said there's somebody who she follows that's I can't remember the name, but it's like the spreadsheet queen or something. And she said she has these amazing Excel tips and I love her. And I think, that's very creative. I think we do, we think of it almost like the Pinterest of today, where it's like, oh, okay, do
Yes.
people care about that? But I think people can kind of get creative with their specialty and come up with something that would be unexpected, maybe when people just think about what's working on the platform, but could really serve their audience. And again, that, TikTok can feel intimidating because people think, oh my gosh, it has to be so quick and every millisecond matters. And so I guess just kind of final question on TikTok would be what are some ways to kind of get started in a way that you can succeed on that platform?
Yeah. I mean, even though TikTok does allow static posts, it is still, I personally feel like, very video driven. And so I always recommend building up a solid video content bank so that you have a ton to pull from before you begin posting, because creating and producing videos can be exhausting. It does require some work between thinking of what you want to share and then editing it to the way that you want to edit it to. And of course, we're all guilty of never being able to nail something in the first take. It might take us several takes. So I would say it really starts with building up that content bank first so that we can get you through the first few weeks or maybe even the first month and kind of give you a grace period so you don't have to try to go all in with just now suddenly having to create all these videos one day after the other because you've started to commit to it. So I would say definitely start with having a content bank. And then I would say think about the topics that you would want to share within those videos. One of my favorite tips that I love to recommend to people when creating content, whether it's for videos or regular social media posts or even blog posts, is to keep a running log of the questions that your clients ask you or the problems that your ideal audience is facing, and write them down, whether it's on the notes app on your phone or in an old-fashioned notebook. Being able to keep a running list of those ideas will ensure that you always have something to talk about online that's going to benefit your audience in some way, because you're directly solving a problem they have or educating them on something they want to learn more about. And so being able to refer to that list as you're filming your videos for TikTok, I think will again relate back to thinking about what that searchable content might be and being able to film content that you know is really going to resonate with the people who need to hear it.
I love it. I think that's excellent advice. The last platform that just wanted to touch on, Twitter or X now, as it's called, how does that fit into people building a personal brand? I mean, I know we all there are people who have been there forever and it's this, they have this massive following. So is it still important to, if you don't and you're just starting, where do you feel like that fits in for growing a personal brand?
I would say it depends on what you plan to use it for and also what industry you're in. So, Christy, you probably see this, but it's great for connecting with journalists. A lot of journalists still use Twitter to be able to look for sources for stories that they're writing or anything like that. The hashtag PR request or hashtag journal request are two hashtags that journalists frequently use to when they put out call outs for sources that they're looking for. So if you're looking to get some press and you have some time to comb through all of the tweets that get posted to those hashtags, that's a great way to use Twitter. But I also would say that Twitter primarily, I feel like is very heavily focused on the tech startup space. There's a lot of venture capitalists, there's a lot of tech founders. That's kind of the direction that I see a lot of the platform going in. So if you fall within that realm and you're someone who is the founder of a tech startup or you're a venture capitalist looking to build your personal brand, Twitter is going to have your people there. But if you're someone who is the executive director of a nonprofit, Twitter might not necessarily be the right place for you. So it really kind of depends on what field it is that you're in and if it makes sense for you to pick up that platform and add it into your little toolkit.
Well, we have covered quite the gamut of social media today. So thank you, Ashley. Is there any final piece of advice that you would have for listeners today about personal brands on social media?
Absolutely. I would say just get started. I think what it comes down to, a lot of it is that people face that analysis paralysis. They tend to overthink it too much, and because they're overthinking it, it's just actually preventing them more and more from just simply getting started and publishing that first post. So I'd say it's always best to rip the band-aid off and write your first post and get it out there and then kind of find your footing as you go. You'll start to get more comfortable, as we talked about earlier on in this episode, and once you feel like you're in a good groove and you're familiar with the different platforms and how they work and how you can use them to your advantage, you'll find yourself excelling online in no time.
Thank you. That's very inspiring. I like that final piece of advice there. And Ashley, where can people connect with you?
You can find me on my website, which is dashofsocial.com. I'm also very engaging on LinkedIn, and you can find me there, which is Ashley Mason. And then you can also find me on Instagram at dashofsocial.
Okay, great. And we will have those in the show notes as well. Ashley, thank you so much for coming on today. Really appreciated it.
Thank you for having me, Christy.
And thank you everyone for listening. Until next time, this is The Business That's Story Built. To succeed in business, your prospects need to know, like, and trust you. To achieve that, you need visibility. Podcasts offer something that other channels don't: attention. More than 80% of listeners listen to the entire episode, and more than 50% consider buying from brands they discover there. Starting your own podcast can bring in a pipeline of leads and strengthen your brand for years to come. To find out if this is right for you, email hello@christiebilbrey.com.